On Valentine's Day in 2022, a man named Kouri Richins ate a sandwich his wife made for him, and shortly after, he became violently ill. He did not simply brush it off as a bad case of food poisoning. He was so deeply unsettled by what was happening to his body that he picked up his phone and sent a chilling text to his business partner and his family. Court records show his exact words were a clear warning. "If anything happens to me, my wife did it." Wow. Just imagine the sheer terror of hitting send on a message like that about the person you share a home with. If you want the truth behind the most twisted investigations, make sure you subscribe to US Crime Stories right now so you never miss out. You really have to feel for Kouri and his family here. We are talking about a father to young boys, a successful businessman, a brother, and a son. But just over 2 weeks after he sent that terrifying text message, his worst fears became reality. It was March 4th, 2022, in Park City, Utah. In the middle of the night, Kouri Richins called emergency services. She told the 911 dispatcher that her husband Kouri was completely unresponsive and cold to the touch. According to the official police report, when responding officers arrived at the house, Kouri gave them her version of how the night unfolded. She told police that she and Kouri had been celebrating a real estate closing. To mark the occasion, she said she made him a Moscow Mule cocktail, brought it to him in bed, and they were having a normal, quiet night. But then, she claimed, one of their children woke up from a night terror. So she told investigators she left Kouri in their primary bedroom and went to sleep in the child's room to comfort him. She stated that when she finally returned to their bedroom later, she found Kouri unconscious. First responders rushed in and did everything they could, but it was too late. They were unable to revive him. At first, police and medics treated the scene as a tragic, sudden medical event. I see how that happens. He was young, and sometimes unexpected medical emergencies happen out of nowhere. But because of his age and the sudden nature of his passing, the medical examiner had to step in and perform an autopsy, and the toxicology report they got back completely changed the entire direction of the investigation. Kouri Richins did not die of natural causes. The autopsy confirmed that he died from a massive oral dose of illicit fentanyl. Holy cow. The medical examiner testified in court that the concentration of the drug in Kouri's system was 5 times the recognized lethal limit. 5 times. And what made this incredibly suspicious was that police said Kouri did not have a prescription for fentanyl, and he had no documented history of opioid abuse. He simply was not a drug user. So immediately, law enforcement knew they were looking at a homicide. Fast forward to the trial and sentencing in May 2026. This is where Utah Judge Richard Mrazek looked Kouri right in the eye and said she was simply too dangerous to ever be free. But the detail that really sticks with you is not just the poisoning itself, it is the timeline. Prosecutors built their entire case around the idea that the Moscow Mule on March 4th was not some sudden, impulsive, one-time mistake. The state laid out a technical, evidence-backed timeline to show the jury that Kouri had made a previous failed attempt, and instead of stopping, she actively chose to keep going. According to prosecutors, she doubled down. That takes us back to that Valentine's Day sandwich. When Kouri survived that violent illness, the state argued that Kouri had a clear choice to make. She had a 17-day window to change her mind. She could have panicked, backed away, and just lived her life. But she did not. Instead, the state brought their star witness to the stand, an illicit drug dealer. This witness testified under oath that during those 17 days, Kouri reached back out to acquire even stronger prescription pills. That caught me off guard when I read the transcripts. You would think a failed attempt would scare someone straight, right? But prosecutors argued it only made her look for a more lethal dose. Now, we have to look at the other side because a trial has 2 sides, and I want to give you the exact truth of what happened in that courtroom. The defense strongly pushed back on the state's narrative. In our legal system, the defense does not have to prove innocence. The burden of proof is entirely on the state. So Kouri's defense team pointed out a major gap in the prosecution's case. There was no direct physical evidence linking Kouri's hands to the actual poison. They reminded the jury that no one actually saw Kouri put fentanyl into that Moscow Mule. The defense offered an alternative theory to the jury. They argued that Eric's death was a tragic accident, a case of self-medication gone horribly wrong. They suggested he could have sourced the fentanyl himself. As for the Valentine's Day sandwich, the defense argued that Eric could have simply contracted a common stomach bug, and his dramatic text messages were just a fearful overreaction to feeling severely sick. They basically asked the jury how they could convict a woman of murder just because her husband had a stomachache a few weeks before an accidental overdose. It was a classic, legally sound, reasonable doubt defense, but prosecutors knew they needed to show the jury why someone would do this. They needed a motive, and they established that by bringing verified financial records into the courtroom. The state presented evidence showing that Kouri operated a house-flipping business that was actually millions of dollars in debt. The financial pressure was immense. But it gets worse. Unbeknownst to Eric, the state proved that Kouri had taken out multiple life insurance policies on him. We are talking about millions of dollars in potential payouts. The prosecution also presented documents alleging she had forged Eric's signature to alter the beneficiaries of his estate. They laid out a paper trail showing she set things up so the money would completely bypass his business partner and his family, flowing directly to her if he died. No way. It is just staggering to look at those financial documents and see the timeline line up with the crime. Plus, police investigators testified about her digital footprint. They told the court they pulled the search history from Kouri's devices and found internet searches for things like luxury prisons and questions about how police conduct investigations. They also presented data logs showing she deleted text messages to that alleged drug supplier right as police started asking questions. When you put the financial motive next to the digital evidence, it creates a very heavy circumstantial case. And then there is the part of the story that made national headlines and really captured the public's attention. After Eric died, before she was officially charged, Kouri actually wrote and published a children's book about grief. It was called Are You With Me? She went on local television broadcasts in 2020-23, smiling warmly, promoting the book, and talking about how she wrote it to help her young sons process the sudden loss of their dad. Prosecutors argued to the jury that this was a highly calculated cover-up. They said it was an attempt to play the role of the grieving widow to deflect suspicion from law enforcement and the community. When the trial concluded, the defense made the ultimate tactical choice. They called 0 witnesses. They did not put Kouri on the stand. They banked entirely on the lack of direct physical evidence, hoping they had poked enough holes to secure a not guilty verdict. But the jury did not buy the defense's theories. After just 3 hours of deliberation, which is incredibly fast for a murder trial, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Kouri Richins was found guilty on all counts, including aggravated murder and insurance fraud. That brings us back to that heavy sentencing day in May 2026. The court shifted from the cold hard facts of the timeline to the devastating human reality of the crime. The court heard victim impact statements from Eric's family, who had been fighting for justice for years. But the most heartbreaking part, according to court records, was the letters submitted by the couple's young children. The children wrote to the court saying they feared their own mother and wanted her in prison forever. Holy moly. Just let that sink in for a second. The trauma those kids have to carry is unimaginable. To lose your dad in such a horrific way and then to have to write a letter to a judge about your mom, it just breaks your heart for them. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Mizrazik pointed out that Kouri committed an aggravated murder because it involved a lethal dose of fentanyl for financial gain, and because it was followed by the calculated cover-up of writing a children's book. The judge explained that Utah law classified this as a major aggravated offense. He ruled that the absolute maximum penalty was required to protect public safety. He sentenced Kouri Richins to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While her appellate lawyers have officially filed notices to challenge the case based on potential procedural errors during the trial, as of right now, she remains locked away. The undeniable trail of digital and financial footprints is exactly what the jury decided proved her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So all the investigation, the search warrants, the financial audits, and those deeply disturbing digital footprints finally brought everything into the courtroom. We are now in March 2026. This is when the trial officially began. You have to picture the atmosphere inside that courtroom. Eric Richins' family is sitting in the gallery. They have waited years for answers. They have gone through the painful process of watching the investigation unfold piece by piece, and they even had to watch Kouri go on television promoting a children's book about grief while she was secretly under investigation. Now they are finally inside a court of law, waiting for the truth to be presented. This was a massive procedural battle. At its core, the trial placed a mountain of circumstantial and digital evidence against the highest legal standard in the system, proving someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution had a major job to do. When they stood up to present the state's case, they did not just give a quick overview. They carefully called more than 40 witnesses to the stand. Think about how long that takes. Day after day, witness after witness, the state built its case piece by piece. They brought in financial experts to explain the millions of dollars in debt Kouri's business was facing. They brought in investigators to talk about the life insurance policies, but the absolute cornerstone of their argument, the moment that truly changed the energy in the room, came when they brought an alleged illicit drug dealer to the stand. This person sat in a court of law, raised their right hand, and directly admitted under oath to selling Kouri the exact fentanyl pills that were found in Eric's system shortly before his death. Holy moly. When something like that comes out during a trial, it completely shifts the dynamic. It is one thing to suspect where the drugs came from, but having the alleged supplier testify about the transaction is a massive piece of the puzzle for the jury to process. But the prosecution did not stop with physical witnesses. They knew we live in a modern world, and they leaned heavily into Kouri's digital footprint. Law enforcement tech experts took the stand and explained how they pulled search history directly from her personal devices. They showed the jury that leading up to the investigation, Kouri was typing searches into her phone about luxury prisons. No way. You really have to stop and ask yourself, why would a grieving widow who claims her husband died from a sudden medical event be researching luxury prisons? They also showed the jury her searches about how police conduct investigations. And if that was not enough, the state presented digital data logs showing she had actively deleted text messages sent to that alleged drug supplier right around the time police started asking hard questions. That caught me off guard. We all know deleting text messages during an active police investigation is a huge red flag, and the prosecution made sure the jury understood the exact timeline of when she decided to wipe those messages from her phone. Why not subscribe to U.S. Crime Stories right now? We bring you the absolute truth behind the most complex cases with zero fluff. Join us. Now, we have to look at how the defense handled this, because every trial is really about two competing narratives. Kouri's defense team took a very strict, tactical approach. In the American legal system, the burden of proof rests entirely on the prosecution. That means a defendant does not have to prove their innocence. They do not have to prove anything at all. It is completely the state's job to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Operating strictly on that constitutional principle, Kouri's lawyers made a massive decision. They called 0 witnesses. They did not bring a single person to testify on Kouri's behalf. And most importantly, they rested their case without putting Kouri on the stand. She never testified in her own defense. I understand why defense attorneys make that choice. Putting a client on the stand opens them up to a brutal cross-examination by the prosecution, and sometimes that can do more damage than good. Their argument to the jury was very clear, and it focused entirely on reasonable doubt. The defense argued that despite the 40 witnesses and all the digital data, the state still had no direct physical evidence tying Kouri to the actual act of murder. They pointed out that absolutely no one saw Kouri put a fentanyl pill into that Moscow Mule. There was no security camera footage of the drink being made, and there was no physical DNA evidence on the glass proving she tampered with it. The defense maintained a completely different version of Eric's death. They argued it was the result of tragic, accidental self-medication gone terribly wrong. They suggested to the jury that Eric could have consumed the fentanyl himself. And when it came to the Valentine's Day sandwich incident, where Eric became violently ill and texted his family that his wife might be trying to hurt him, the defense had an answer for that too. They argued it was likely just a common stomach bug or an unrelated illness, not an attempted poisoning. They claimed his text message was simply an overreaction to feeling extremely sick. After both sides rested, everything was in the hands of the jury. They had to go into a closed room and weigh the state's aggressive timeline, the financial motive, and the digital evidence against the defense's argument of reasonable doubt. You have to wonder what those conversations were like behind closed doors. Did the state prove it? Was the lack of an eyewitness enough to create doubt? On March 16, 2026, we got the answer. After only 3 hours of deliberation, which is an incredibly fast turnaround for a complex murder trial involving more than 40 witnesses, the jury announced that they had reached a decision. They returned a unanimous verdict. Kouri Richins was found guilty on all counts, including aggravated murder and insurance fraud. Wow. 3 hours. That tells you the jury was completely unified in how they viewed the state's evidence. Even though the verdict was unanimous, the structure of this trial still leaves room for objective, unbiased legal analysis. If we step back and look at how the courtroom battle worked, there are two major debates that legal scholars and trial watchers are still discussing about this case. The first major debate is circumstantial evidence versus direct evidence. Did the jury rely too heavily on circumstantial digital evidence? Legally speaking, a judge tells the jury that circumstantial evidence carries the same weight as direct evidence. The classic example lawyers use is a footprint in the snow. A footprint in the snow is circumstantial evidence that someone walked past your house. Seeing the person walk past your window is direct evidence. Both can prove someone was there. In this trial, the prosecution used the deleted texts, the massive business debt, the hidden life insurance policies, and the internet searches for luxury prisons as their footprint in the snow. It painted a very clear picture of intent and guilt. But the defense raised a serious legal question that is worth debating. Does a pattern of digital behavior completely erase the lack of hard physical proof connecting Kouri's hands to that specific glass containing the Moscow Mule? The defense argued that without seeing the act, there is always reasonable doubt. The jury clearly disagreed, but it remains a fascinating legal threshold to examine. The second major point of debate is the zero witness strategy. Why did the defense call no witnesses? Right. While it is a standard and fundamental legal right to force the state to prove its case without presenting a counter-defense, legal analysts still debate whether that strategy was a fatal mistake in this trial. Kouri's lawyers clearly believed that putting her or any defense witnesses through cross-examination would only damage her case further. They believed they had created enough holes in the state's timeline to win on reasonable doubt alone. But in a modern courtroom, we have to ask how juries perceive silence. Does resting your case without presenting an active counter-narrative or a single character witness look like defeat to a jury? Even if it is technically a sound and constitutionally protected legal move, did the jury see the lack of defense witnesses as a silent admission that there was no good explanation for the fentanyl or the internet searches? These are the complex realities of the legal system. The jury made their decision based on the law given to them, and they concluded that the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. For Eric's family, the guilty verdict meant that the person responsible for taking away a father, a son, and a brother was finally being held accountable by the court. So after the jury returned that guilty verdict in just 3 hours, the entire case moved into the final and, honestly, the heaviest phase of the trial. We are talking about the sentencing hearing. This took place on May 13th, 2026. And if you have been following the timeline of this family, that date carries a massive, heartbreaking weight. In a heavy coincidence, May 13 would have actually been Eric Richins' birthday. Wow. Just think about the emotional reality of that for a second. His family had to walk into a courtroom to face the woman convicted of taking his life on the exact day they should have been gathering together to celebrate him. You really cannot script something that deeply tragic. During the actual trial, the court is strictly focused on timelines, digital records, and financial footprints. It is very cold and procedural. But the sentencing hearing is entirely different. This is the moment where the court officially shifts from the mechanics of the crime to the human cost. This is when the victims finally get to speak their truth to the judge. The prosecution submitted devastating victim impact statements from Eric's family. You have to understand how difficult it is for a family to write something like that. They had to stand up or have their words formally read into the court record and explain exactly how Eric's death completely shattered their world. They talked about the man he was behind closed doors. They talked about him as a father, a brother, a business partner, and a son. They wanted the judge to understand the massive, irreplaceable void left behind when Eric was poisoned. It really brings the focus right back to where it should be, on the person who lost his life. But the most striking part of the entire hearing came from the couple's young children. According to official court records, the judge received written statements from Eric and Kouri's kids. And what those letters said is absolutely gut-wrenching to hear. The letters explicitly stated that the children feared their own mother. They told the judge they wanted her to remain in prison forever. Holy moly. Just let that sink in for a minute. Imagine the amount of psychological trauma and pain those young boys have had to endure to write a letter like that about their mom. It just breaks your heart because you realize there are innocent kids at the center of this who essentially lost both of their parents in completely different and deeply traumatic ways. After hearing all of those statements, it was time for Judge Richard Mrazek to hand down the sentence, and he did not hold back. The judge sentenced Kouri Richins to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But he did not stop there. He also added consecutive sentences for her financial crimes and the attempted murder charge connected to that Valentine's Day sandwich incident. By making those sentences consecutive instead of concurrent, the court basically ensured that she would serve those penalties back to back. It was the court's way of making sure the punishment was as absolute as the law would allow. Now, if we step back and look at this as an objective legal case, it brings up a very important debate. Was a life sentence without the possibility of parole legally justified here? Judge Mrazek grounded his decision very strictly in Utah state law. He explained his reasoning to the courtroom. Under the statute, committing murder for financial gain and using poison to do it are considered major aggravating factors. The judge noted that the lethal dose of fentanyl was extreme. But what really pushed it over the edge for the court was what happened after. The judge pointed to the calculated cover-up of writing and promoting a children's grief book while she was secretly under investigation. He stated that this placed the crime into the category of an extreme, aggravated offense. Because of all these factors, the court ruled that the absolute maximum penalty was legally warranted to protect public safety. Right? I can see exactly how the judge arrived at that conclusion by following the letter of the law. But to give you the full, unbiased picture, we also have to look at the other side of the legal debate. Defense advocates and many legal analysts who study the justice system often argue that life without the possibility of parole should be reserved for a different category of criminals. They argue it should be kept for serial offenders or mass casualty cases. They question whether a first-time nonviolent offender, which Kouri was before this specific case, should have been given at least a small chance at possible rehabilitation decades down the line. They point out that she has young children, and they debate the philosophy of locking someone away forever without any chance of review. Some people in the legal community also raise a very valid question about the media. They debate whether the intense worldwide media coverage surrounding this grief author case subconsciously pressured the court. Did the viral nature of the story push the judge into handing down the maximum sentence to satisfy public outrage? It is a really fascinating conversation about how our courts balance strict punishment with the possibility of human rehabilitation. But back in that courtroom, Kouri Richins did not just sit quietly and accept the judge's reasoning. She completely refused to accept the verdict, and she refused to accept the narrative presented by the state. During the sentencing hearing, a defendant is given the legal right to address the court. Kouri took that opportunity, and she delivered a massive 45-minute address to the room. During this speech, she did not show remorse for the crime or ask the judge for leniency. Instead, she strongly maintained her absolute innocence. Speaking directly to her sons through the official court record, she told them to never admit to something you didn't do. That caught me off guard. After seeing a unanimous jury verdict, and after weeks of the state laying out her internet searches and deleted texts, she used her final moments in front of the judge to double down on her innocence. No way. It really shows you her mindset and how firmly she is standing her ground, regardless of what the jury decided. This brings our timeline squarely into June 2026. The trial is officially over, the verdict is in, and the sentence has been handed down. But if you know anything about the legal system, you know the process is not actually finished. Kouri Richins is not giving up the fight. As of right now, the Utah Court of Appeals has officially accepted Kouri's notice of appeal. It is really important to understand what an appeal actually looks like, because it is not a do-over of the trial. Her new team of appellate lawyers is not going back into a courtroom to re-argue the facts of the Moscow Mule. They are not going to try to prove that the drug dealer was lying on the stand or argue about the life insurance policies. That phase is completely done. Instead, an appeal is a highly technical process. Her lawyers are challenging the case based strictly on potential procedural errors made during the trial. They will argue to a panel of higher judges that the jury was exposed to evidence they legally should not have seen. Or they might argue that Judge Mrazek made incorrect rulings from the bench that ultimately denied her a fair and constitutional trial. That is how the appeals process works. They fight the mechanics of how the trial was conducted, not the physical evidence itself. And meanwhile, she still faces a mountain of other legal issues. The court docket shows pending, unresolved charges for separate financial fraud that have not even gone to trial yet. So even as she fights this murder conviction, she has prosecutors preparing to take her to court over the money. Holy cow. The legal battles are just stacking up one after another. But for now, as the lengthy appellate process begins its slow journey through the higher courts, Kouri Richins remains in state custody, locked behind bars, serving her life sentence. It is a deeply tragic case that leaves behind a shattered family, young children without their parents, and a lot of complex questions about how our justice system works. Before we officially wrap this up, I want to ask you guys a question, and I would love to see your unbiased thoughts down in the comments. Considering the legal debates we just talked about, do you think life without parole is the right sentence for a first-time offender in a case like this? Or do you think intense media coverage puts too much pressure on judges to hand down the maximum penalty? Let me know what you think below. Thank you for staying till the end. I highly encourage you not to miss the next video. We have an amazing story coming up soon.